Tonight's lesson is dedicated to Ilay Nishmas to Bil Habastvar of Abraham. We are up to chapter 3 in the Mimer. As a general theme in this Mimer, we can ask ourselves a pretty obvious but and sort of fundamental question, which is more primary, that we be good people or that we do good things? Now, those two may seem to overlap, and of course they do in many ways. Good people do good things. Can a person who does a bad thing still be a good person, or can a bad person still do good things? I think we would say, obviously, yes. So we don't have to choose between one or the other. We, of course, aspire to be good and to do good. Where do we put the emphasis? And so Torah squarely comes down that the emphasis, but as we're going to discuss here, not to the exclusion, the emphasis is on doing good things. And when we talk about doing, we mean even internally. What do I willfully, voluntarily decide to concentrate on, to think deeply about, not maybe what passes through my mind? I may not be able to control that, but I can control what I fixate on. What I say, I certainly can control, and of course, what I do. Those three are referred to as the three garments. Like garments, we can put them on and take them off. And just because I am right now wearing the garment of appropriate thoughts, appropriate words, and appropriate deeds, does not mean that I am insulated from ever having inappropriate, willful, voluntary thoughts of anger, revenge, or whatever it may be. And it doesn't mean that I am incapable of speaking ill or doing ill. So like a garment, just because I'm wearing it right now doesn't mean that someone else, or in my case, or in this internal case, my animalistic, self-serving impulses are neutered from being able to grab it away from me and put it on themselves. So those are called the three garments. We also, of course, have an essential character, what our character is like. Now, we've all heard the Hollywood excuse, well, I'm really a good person. I just did a bad thing. And that's true. I'm not even denying that someone can still be a good person. But again, I'm more interested on the person who does good than the person who, quote, is good. And this is encapsulated in the story that we are analyzing in this mimer. We began with a quick summary of the 12 spies, which Moses sent in advance of the Israelites thinking that they were about to enter the land of Israel. And as we know, unfortunately, that led to their discouraging and disparaging report. It was during this time, this is when they were there, they returned on Tisha B'Av, which we will commemorate in a couple of weeks. And all the people were wringing their hands and wailing, and they said, oh, this was a terrible idea, and we should have stayed in Egypt. And as a result, they had to wander for 40 years. We read actually in this week's Parsha that before Moshe dies, he asks Hashem to appoint a successor, and God chooses Moshe's most prized and devoted protege, Joshua, who was one of the two spies, he and Kalev, who resisted the temptation and came back with a positive report. And the first action that Joshua takes 1 month after Moses' passing, when he now has assumed the reins of leadership, is, seemingly shockingly, to send in spies. And of course, our question is, what are you doing, Joshua? You're setting us up for the same problem you yourself lived through 40 years ago. What are you doing? And thankfully, Joshua's spies, he only sent 2, return. And on the contrary, they are encouraging and they are very helpful in the actual invasion of the land. So the question is, why were Moses' spies such a disaster and Joshua's spies were such a success? So we start to look at some of the compare and contrast of the differences between the task that Moshe placed upon his spies, in contrast to the task which Joshua placed upon the spies whom he dispatched. And one glaring distinction is that Moshe dispatched the spies to scout out the 7, that's the key, the 7 occupying tribes of the land of Israel. And Joshua sent out his spies only to scout out the 3 perimeter tribes on the border town of Israel. Now, the mimer then, as a mimer does, deviates or goes away from the narrative. We're no longer telling the story. This isn't an analysis of history. And it starts to give us the personal level. What is the takeaway for us as human beings as to when we will succeed and when there will be struggle? So we pick up, our clue is in these 2 numbers, the 7 tribes that Moses dispatched his spies to peruse, in contrast to the 3 whom Joshua dispatched. And we now explain it as a metaphor, that Moshe, because he was at a level of Moshe, far more detached from the impulses of this physical world, his message to his generation, the generation that saw the greatest miracles, that left Egypt, saw the sea split, saw God defend them against Amalek, felt the protection of God's divine cloud, ate the manna, etc. He said to them, you need to go and do a personal analysis to not only impact your behavior, but to change your character. That is, not only to do nice things, but to become a nice person. We've all met people who are just instinctively, whatever the characteristic is, orderly and disciplined, generous and kind, compassionate and understanding, charismatic. It's just like a gift. It's like being tall. And then there are people who aren't naturally that way, but they make a real human effort. They really work on their character to resist their more natural impulse to be shy, harsh, rigid, intolerant, and they become kind and compassionate, or I should say, they act kindly and compassionately. And Moses is saying, I want everybody to do a self-analysis, not only to improve your behavior, but to improve your very character. Work on who you are, not just what you do. And guess what? They weren't able to do it. They said, Moshe, we can do nice things, but to change my very identity and to genuinely become a nice person, I don't know that I can do that. So they, quote, failed. Okay, remember, we've left the narrative of the story and we're now seeing it as a metaphor. Joshua said, okay, guys, this is what I want you to do. Not that he doesn't care, as we'll explain. He says, I'm not going to focus on whether or not you are kind. What I'm going to focus on is, what do you actually do? Do you do kind things? Do you say kind words? Do you think kind thoughts? Are you organized in your behavior, even if you're not organized in your character? I want you to work on the 3 modes of expression, the 3 garments, as is indicated by his mission being to the 3 perimeter border tribes. And that will change what you do, which includes what you willfully think about and what you say, and that they were successful. So that's what we've talked about until now. Here in chapter 3, the Rebbe points out, look, Moshe is a very bright guy, graduated first in his class. So the fact that Torah tells us the story of Moshe dispatching the spies, and again, now we're looking at it metaphorically, Moshe telling each of us to do an investigation of our character, not just our behavior, but our innate character, and to analyze all 7 of our identifiers. The fact that Moshe tells us to do it, even though they failed, means there must be some lesson here. There must be some way that we can do it. And this is a common theme in Torah. In society, we have a tendency that if we try something and we fail, we never try that again. As the saying goes, if first you don't succeed, don't try skydiving. But Torah has a very different mentality. King Solomon writes that the wise man falls 7 times, the fool but once. Why does the wicked fool only fall once while the wise man falls 7 times? Answer, because the wicked guy falls once, he says, forget it, I'm not trying that again. And the wise man falls, but he tries and he falls and he tries and he falls and he tries and he falls. So it is true that Moshe Rabbeinu's spies, that is Moshe Rabbeinu's instruction, that we seek out, investigate, we spy out the very essence of our character, did not succeed. However, it still retains a residual message for each of us. Now, this takes us to the essential work of Chabad teaching, which is known colloquially as the Tanya. And now a shameless plug for the Sunday morning 9:15 Tanya class at this very same Zoom link, same Zoom channel, 9:15 Sunday mornings, no extra charge. Now, in the Tanya, the Alter Rebbe brings up a couple of terms, ones that we are familiar with, they're independent from Tanya, and two that he talks about in some great detail are the tzaddik, translation, the righteous person, and the Beinani. Now, the book that the Alter Rebbe begins, although we call it the Tanya, the Alter Rebbe named it the Book of the Beinani. What does this word Beinani mean? If you look it up in translation, it means the in-betweener. So it sounds like, and until the Alter Rebbe, it was always understood to mean, a guy who's in between. He's not perfect. He's not evil. He's the Goldilocks of virtue. Not too hot, not too cold. And then what was considered the tzaddik? Oh, that guy's a tzaddik. He's such a nice guy. He's a sweetheart. And the Alter Rebbe, again, he's not talking about the legal interpretation of those terms. He's not talking about, am I going in the up elevator or the down elevator? Rather, the Alter Rebbe says that we want to use these terms to help us understand not just what we do, but who we are. And the Alter Rebbe explains that the Beinani does every mitzvah, never deviates, never misses a mitzvah opportunity, and never violates a prohibition. We rarely meet anybody who is a Beinani. They're pretty difficult people to find. Of course, they exist, but they're pretty difficult to find. And so the Alter Rebbe tells us that the Beinani struggles with his character, executes every time in his behavior. The tzaddik is not just a really nice guy who's, such a tzaddik. We use that colloquially, but what it truly means is not about what he does, but who he is, that he is righteous. And when we say righteous, that means that he has uprooted any impulse for misbehavior, in contrast to the Beinani, whom the Alter Rebbe curiously, in a certain sense, holds in higher regard, because he's overcome his impulse. To use a simple analogy, we know that it is prohibited to eat on Yom Kippur, obvious. Is it prohibited to become hungry on Yom Kippur? Well, obviously not, because hunger is involuntary and eating is voluntary. However, we hopefully have all experienced, imagine you're there at Kol Nidre, you're just starting, you're so enthusiastic, and in walks a guy with a pizza. What are you doing here? It's Kol Nidre. What are you walking in with a pizza for? Now, at the end of Yom Kippur, when I've been sitting there for 20 hours and the guy next to me's got bad breath and someone walks in with a pizza, well, is it time for pizza yet? I won't eat it. It's up. You can't. But there's already some degree of temptation. So the tzaddik has completely uprooted any impulse, any interest in anything that deviates or opposes godliness. That is the character of the tzaddik. In contrast to the Beinani, who never does anything he shouldn't do, ever, and never misses an opportunity to do a mitzvah. Again, almost unimaginable itself. However, the difference between the Beinani and the tzaddik is that the tzaddik is repulsed by the very idea of a sin, and the Beinani is not repulsed by it, but he doesn't do it. Imagine if you had a child and they were allergic to strawberries. You might develop a distaste for strawberries because you see what it does to your child. Even though you might like strawberries. But when you see that it makes your child sick, you have a distaste for strawberries. Well, that's how the tzaddik feels about anything that violates Hashem's instruction or will. So the Beinani resists temptation. The tzaddik has developed himself beyond temptation. So we have a rule that we can tell you have to be a Beinani. Does God expect us to be perfect? Well, yeah. He expects you to show up on time every time. How often are you allowed to sin? Never. Now, it's true that in the look back, we say, well, I guess if I did a sin, we can tolerate it. Doesn't destroy my relationship. But we don't go into our day by saying, well, how many sins do we have to do today? Imagine if you would meet somebody and they say, I believe that it's acceptable to lie 5 times a week. or 5 times in a lifetime. So then you can never trust them. Is this one of those 5? Now imagine you meet somebody at the end of their life and they say, my whole life I lied 5 times. Oh, well, maybe that's not so terrible. But it's not a philosophy that it is okay to lie 5 times. So the Beinoni goes into every moment and there's a struggle. We don't see it. We think it's easy for him. It's easy. He doesn't struggle with it. But maybe he does. And the tzaddik doesn't struggle. So again, there is a certain distinct reverence for this person, even though he's only the intermediate man, because he overcomes his struggles. So now we might say, okay, well, this Beinoni, he has really served Hashem because he has gone outside of his personal pleasures. However, we find something that seems to contradict this whole philosophy. The Talmud tells us that prior to a neshama being dispatched down here into this world, he gets called in by Hashem, who tells him, you're going down into the world and I need you to do mitzvahs. And I want you to swear to me that you're going to be a tzaddik and not be wicked. And I'm telling you, the whole world's going to tell you you're a tzaddik, but don't fall for it. Don't get overconfident. Now he hits him on the helmet. He says, get out there, Sparky, and win, win, win. So we ask the question, how can you tell me to be a tzaddik? You can tell me not to eat on Yom Kippur, but can you really tell me not to get hungry on Yom Kippur? And herein lies the insight that we have from Moshe Rabbeinu dispatching his spies to investigate the 7 lands, the metaphor being that we have to investigate and search out and study our character so that we not only don't do the Aveira, we don't violate God's will, we seize every opportunity for conforming with God's will, like the Beinoni, and at least a little bit, we work on ourselves, we work on our character to not even want the sin. So a little bit, we work on changing our impulse. So not only that I don't ever lose my temper, I become a more patient person. Not only that I act more kindly, I become kinder. Not only that I act more disciplined, self-disciplined, I become self-disciplined. And that is within our capacity and our obligation to at least approach and again, struggle with our character, not only our compliance. And this is where the Mimer is headed now, to understand that although Moshe's spies failed in the total transformation of their character, we can all reach for changing our character a little bit. We can reach a little bit and not just change our behavior, but move the needle about who we are, not just what we do, and not say, look, as long as I do what I'm supposed to, what do you want from me? I'm doing everything I need to. There's an old saying that the word job stands for just over broke. It's an attitude that sometimes exists both between the employer and the employee. Some employees say, what's the least amount I got to do and you won't get fired? And some employers say, what's the least amount I got to pay the guy and you won't quit? So that's one form of serving Hashem. What do I got to do? And you're not going to yell at me. But we're hopeful to reach a more profound level of our relationship with Hashem, not just what's the least amount I got to do and I'll be in compliance, but how can I truly become aligned with Hashem? You think about this in our relationship with God. Think about this in our relationship with others. You know, if anyone's ever had that bad experience of a friend who just wants to keep that other person around just long enough in case I need them, what's the least amount I got to do? And this person will still be my friend. They'll still be my spouse. They'll still be my carpool partner. And what I did everything I'm supposed to do. Or are we, again, making that personal transformative effort to develop our character to become kind in addition to what we do that is kind? This is where the Mimer is taking us now. We'll continue, of course, next week. Tomorrow night, we'll learn Parsha. We'll see you tomorrow night. Good night, everybody. I'll send out the recording in a few minutes.